No.
So if you liked Project Hail Mary, here are 5 more movies that you should watch. And by that, I don't mean the obvious ones like Interstellar, Arrival, Sunshine, The Martian, or Ad Astra. You know, the ones that have already been brought up the most in the discussion surrounding Project Hail Mary. If you haven't seen any of those 5, just consider them as a bonus and start there. But okay, you've seen all of those, now it's time for some deeper cuts. First up is Oxygen. This is a French movie that's playing on Netflix, I think, which is about a woman who wakes up with memory loss in a confined space. It's like this sort of futuristic medical pod or something, you know, vaguely reminiscent of Project Hail Mary, in which Ryan Gosling wakes up not knowing where he is and having to figure out what's going on. The same basic premise we find in Oxygen. You know, there's a woman, she wakes up, no memory of what happened, she vaguely remembers being transferred to the hospital, but anyways, now she's awake in this medical pod that is malfunctioning, and this is where the conflict begins because of its malfunctioning, the oxygen is set to run out in 90 minutes or so, you know, the runtime of the movie basically. And it's pretty entertaining. You know, the movie takes place entirely in this confined space. It's really one of those one location type of movies. But the filmmaking is creative enough so that it feels dynamic, even though you're basically just inside a box for most of the movie. There's a few twists and turns along the way as the main character reveals or remembers more about her past and why she might have ended up in the place that she's now stuck in. I won't spoil it here, just go watch it for yourself, and yeah, it's a pretty good time. Next up is a movie that I hadn't heard of until recently, and that's a science fiction movie called Europa Report.
We're a long way away now. I can't even see Earth anymore.
It's basically a space mission to Jupiter, if I remember, or Saturn, you know, some planet in our solar system, but it's entirely filmed as a sort of found footage documentary, which I thought was a really interesting twist on this genre, and it's one that I just enjoy personally a lot. You know, the kind of mixed formatting with different types of cameras, different ways in which characters address the camera. You know, there's a sort of later documentary that's looking back in hindsight on the mission. There's cam footage that the astronauts recorded during the mission. There's just like security footage from inside the space station, and so on. You know, it's just a mix of different types of footage, and it's all mixed together in a way that I did find very inventive and creative. The movie is slightly lacking in characterization and getting you connected to the characters of this movie, but nevertheless it does have some good sequences, some tension, and some interesting reveals towards the end that, you know, while not being anything mind-blowing, does make for a satisfying science fiction experience if you've already seen all of those other movies that I mentioned at the beginning. Now here's a movie that I also hadn't heard of, but that is remarkably similar to Project Hail Mary in its premise. It's about an astronaut who goes on this solo space mission where he discovers a giant alien spider that then becomes a friend. And also the astronaut is played by Adam Sandler.
Why are you here? I am like you, an explorer.
But no, it's not Project Hail Mary. This is the movie Spaceman, which features Adam Sandler in the titular role, I guess, of the spaceman who is trapped up in space. But unlike what the premise of this movie suggests, you know, Adam Sandler in space befriending a giant spider, this is not a light, funny movie. It actually plays it pretty straight and just like tonally, it's very solemn almost. You know, this is one of the serious Adam Sandler movies, not the silly ones. And it's not the best, to be honest. You know, I did find it to be a bit, you know, too downbeat for maybe the premise that it had. And I was hoping for a little bit more levity, which is kind of interesting because in Project Hail Mary, I kind of had the opposite issue where I felt like it was too lightweight and I was lacking some of that sort of like gravitas in certain moments. But as such, it is an interesting movie to put in contrast with Project Hail Mary and to see kind of for yourself how similar premises can play out very differently based on different tonalities and how difficult it can be to kind of tweak that into a sort of satisfying balance that's not too much of either too heavy or too light and whatnot. So yeah, in that sense, it's more interesting as a case study maybe than as a really good movie to watch. But as such, I did find it worth my time.
Touchdown!
Up next is a more classic movie that I'm not actually sure if it's still being watched a lot nowadays. It did get a special edition not too long ago, I think 1 or 2 years ago. But it's James Cameron's The Abyss. So this movie doesn't go up in space, it goes into the depths of the ocean, which, as James Cameron is so good at demonstrating, is just as alien and dangerous and mysterious as outer space is. Being a James Cameron movie, this is also a really big movie. It's like 3 hours, or at least the special edition is. It has a lot of stuff going on. The production was notably or notoriously very difficult. A lot of people won't even talk about it who were involved. But as difficult and frustrating as it might have been to make it, as satisfying it is now to watch the results, because this is a movie that does feel very gritty. It has a great cast of characters who feel very grounded and at place in the reality of this world, which is this drilling station that has to assist in a military operation to go into the depths. I don't remember exactly the exact plot details and I don't want to spoil them also, so I'm just going to leave it vague. It's just a very well-made movie with a lot of classical James Cameron suspense and skill also. He has a lot of big set pieces. There's a lot of attention to detail also in the way the deep sea operations work and the way diving works, and all of those things that are his passion and his skill set, or the things that he's very knowledgeable about. All that kind of shines through in this movie in a way that's very just really entertaining. The movie also has really good special effects for its time. I think this was the late 80s, 88 or something. So yeah, if you want to see James Cameron do like a big space movie that's not actually in space, that's not Avatar, but that's taking place in the depths of the ocean, which are much more terrifying and much less inviting than the world of Avatar is, but which is nevertheless filled with a sense of wonder and which has some great characters and an interesting plotline, then I think The Abyss is also a movie that you would enjoy, and that maybe if you are of a younger generation, you may not have seen yet. I think if you're a bit older like me, it's the kind of movie that you got on cable maybe sometime in the 90s or early zeros, because it was the type of movie that was just played a lot back then. But even if you did see that movie, you can still check out the special edition, which I thought was worth checking out. I didn't have too strong of a connection to the original one, but I had fun with the new one, so yeah. Okay, lastly, I have a Brian De Palma movie for you from the year 2000, I think, yes, which was critically panned on its release, and it is a little bit strange even to this day. But if you really liked Project Hail Mary, you might get a kick out of this one, and that's Mission to Mars.
Headed straight for Mars One base camp.
Could get a little hairy right about landing time.
Yeah.
So Mission to Mars starts out with a mission to Mars where a group of astronauts encounters something strange, something seemingly alien, and then go missing. And that prompts then a second mission to Mars with those who are our actual main characters. It's kind of weirdly paced, this one. It takes a lot of time to get the first mission going and then to set up the sort of stakes for the second mission, which is, the real essence of the movie. But it does have some decent character work that ends up carrying you through it as you do develop like a connection to the astronauts involved. Other than that, it's also a movie that spends a lot of time on the science. I'm not sure how accurate or plausible it all is. To me, it seemed plausible enough. It also sets up some bigger questions about philosophy and the origins of humanity, which were really interesting and fun to see. Special effects were really good as well for that era, 2000. I think that's already when special effects were done pretty well. In fact, I think 2000 might be closer to the peak of sort of special effects quality than the present is. But anyways, good looking movie, entertaining movie, some great characters, great actors to play them. A good soundtrack too, if I remember. And even though it's the critics hated it and the audience score also isn't that much, I do think this is, it's not a movie. I wouldn't sort of nominate it for a broader reappreciation, but I do think it's worth a watch if you were a fan of Project Hail Mary. So yeah, those are my recommendations. As you can probably tell, I really tried to find some picks that weren't just the obvious choices. If you enjoyed this format, if you want to see me do more recommendations based on something else, like Project Hail Mary, if you have a movie or a theme that you want me to give you some recommendations for, let me know, and I'll know if it's worth doing more of these. So yeah, hopefully you'll enjoy these movies. Thank you for joining me on this second channel. This was Tom from Like Stories of Old, by the way, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.